Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we are going to be talking to George Howe Colt about a book that, by its title, I'm surprised ever got published. The title of this book is Brothers. Brothers. George Howe Colt on his brothers and brothers in history. And I'm reading it exactly as they sent it to me. I welcome you, and I'm really very proud that you wanted to do this book on your brothers and partly on your family, and you got it done. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Did they look at you say, what the heck? I mean, was there surprise subject-wise at Scribner's?
Well, not really. When I decided that I wanted to write this book, I wrote it really because as the older I get, the more I realized that my brothers had a huge impact on my life. Being the second of four brothers was something that had a great impact on me, and I wanted to explore that. And fortunately, it's not just about my brothers and me. It's also about lots of famous brothers in the past.
Yes, the brothers in history.
Yes,
and it becomes then a book of a much larger scope.
Yes,
than what you would capture looking at a single family, even one as fascinating as yours. And well, it is a fascinating family, I think. Particularly, when one gets to the end of the book and that last chapter where you're gathering in Massachusetts, I guess.
Up in Maine
in Maine, and you're talking about where everybody's coming from to get to the celebration. One realizes that these brothers have done quite a few things.
Yes, and very, very far flung. My older brother, a doctor in Maine. My next younger brother worked for many years as a foreign correspondent for television news. And then my younger brother stayed closer to home and lives in the Boston area and works in recycling. And
you're slumping around writing books.
And I'm slumping around writing books,
okay.
Yes, taking notes. Yes.
Good for you.
Yes.
Good.
You.
That's really great. The subtitle then is really very important. Brothers in history, and some of those history type brothers are the Thoreaus, the Van Goghs. And I interviewed somebody about that very fat Van Gogh.
That just came out last year.
Yeah.
Yes, 5,000 pages of single-spaced notes posted online.
Yes, online. Yeah. And Theo, who's the brother, really plays a very central part in that story. I mean, after reading that book, I said to myself, if there were no Theo, there would be not a single Van Gogh painting.
I think that's pretty much true. And, of course, their story is very well told by many previous biographers, but I wanted to tell their story because I also wanted to talk a little bit about Vincent's effect on Theo. It's true that without Theo, there would be no Vincent.
Yeah.
Without Vincent, there would be no Theo.
Gotcha.
And I use them to explore the subject of brother's keeper. There have been, a huge number of brothers in history that have had to, for various reasons, sort of take care of a younger or an older brother. Often it's an older brother taking care of a younger brother, but in this case, in Theo's case, of course, it was the younger brother taking care of the older.
Taking care of an older. Then you also cover the Marx Brothers.
Yes, and they were. I'm tempted to say they were a lot of fun to write about, and they were, as long as they were on stage, and I was writing about them on stage. But whenever they were off stage, they were fascinating, but they were prickly and difficult with each other in many cases, and so
stealing each other's women.
Stealing each other's women.
I mean,
yes.
That's not a nice
stealing
thing.
Each other's lines, stealing each other's stories.
That's showbiz.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you spend a lot of time, a long chapter, on the Booths.
Yes.
John Wilkes. But, boy, that's a strange, wonderful, theatrical family. Which,
yes,
one hears it kind of ad passum, or in passum when the whole Lincoln thing comes up, and he had several brothers who were on the stage. But you really get into this, and it's an amazing family.
And being here in San Francisco reminds me a lot of the Booths because Edwin Booth, who was 2 or 4 years older than John Wilkes. When he was 12 years old, he went on the road with his father, his actor father, as his father's dresser. And his main job wasn't so much to sort of keep him dressed, but it was to keep him sober and to keep him sane before he went on stage, and then to track him down afterwards. And the reason I mention how happy I am to be here in San Francisco is because when Edwin Booth was 19, he and his father came to San Francisco, where Edwin's older brother, Junius, was a theatrical stage manager and a very successful one here in San Francisco. And so they came out here, and Edwin really spent a lot of the formative early years of his acting career here in San Francisco back in the early 1850s.
And really became a star.
And became a huge star when he went back east at the age of, I think, 20 or 21. He was billed as the hope of the living drama, which seems a lot to live up to.
Your quotes about them seem to suggest to me that very paramount in the style of reporting about theater in those days was hyperbole.
Yes.
I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, the last hope of the Western world, the savior of the arts, and, on and on. And
yes, we think we've honed PR releases to a fine art here in the 21st century, but we have nothing on them.
Absolutely zero do we have on them. Well, in many cases, historically, the relationship between brothers is very competitive, like between the Kellogg's. Just stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
George Howe Colt on his brothers and brothers in history. That's what we're talking about. The title of the book is Brothers, and it is published by Scribner. And people have been saying some nice things about it. A gentleman by the name of Adam Goodhart, author of 1861, The Civil War Awakening. A master craftsman of literary nonfiction, George Howe Colt brilliantly conjoins history and memoir, insight and humor, not to mention Cain and Abel, Groucho and Harpo. I like that. Cain and Abel, Groucho and Harpo. I mean, that's
You never hear those four names in a sentence usually.
No, that's an awfully wide net you cast there. Every page of this book is a pleasure. Now, in addition to your own family, your own relationship with your brothers, which we'll get to, please God, and covering these, I find, interesting and strange brothers, you also talk about the theory of it all. And at one point, you remark, a growing amount of research suggests that siblings may be influenced most strongly by the things they don't share.
Yes, that was fascinating to me and fascinating to a lot of people when they started to do research in this area, because for so long it's been thought that siblings who grow up in the same family, they have the same parents usually, they have the same cultural influences in the house, they maybe go to the same school, maybe they get the same piano teacher, whatever. They would seem to grow up and be very similar, but in fact they don't. And some research has found that siblings who grow up in the same family can be, in some cases, more different than two people who are unrelated completely and share no genetic crossover. So, and why is this? Well, it's partly because of a theory that some have called the microenvironment, and that is that each sibling in a family essentially grows up in a different family. The circumstances of each sibling are so different. There's a different number of siblings in the family, of course, when a new one comes along. The parents may be in a different phase of their lives. They experience things so differently from their other siblings that it's as if they grow up in different families. And that was certainly the case with the Booths. Edwin Booth, of course, grew up with his father on the road. John Wilkes Booth grew up in slave-owning Maryland with his mother and his sister, who coddled him to the nth degree.
Psychologists, you say in the book, psychologists say that the experience of each child within a family is so distinct that each grows up in his own unique microenvironment. In effect, each sibling grows up in a different family.
Yes.
Now, that's startling.
Yeah.
That's startling. But you can see when you start to look at those varying factors that, I mean, for example, birth order, where the family is when you arrive, just those two things alone
are huge. Have huge impact on character and personality and outcome.
Well, on to my favorite family that you cover in here, the Kellogg's. Now,
why are they your favorite?
The reason that they're my favorites, I mean, one of the reasons is I had them on the breakfast table this morning. And when I was looking at them on the breakfast table this morning, the thing that you're supposed to read when you're a kid about, when you're looking at eating your cereal, you read the box, okay? Oh, I looked at the box, and the stuff recommended on the back sounded just like the stuff that Kellogg was serving at the sanitarium.
Well, that's interesting. That may well be true, although he served some very, very strange things back then. John Harvey Kellogg, of course, was the proprietor of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which was from about 1885 to 1930, was sort of the hugest thing in health. If you put a sort of a spa, a cruise ship, Whole Foods, and a number of other things together, you'd get the Battle Creek Sanitarium.
Yeah, a number of other things, really weird things.
Really weird things.
Emphasis on enema, for example.
Yes, John Harvey Kellogg believed that
Notice the tasteful way I said that.
The path to godliness led through cleanliness, and it was very important that you keep those bowels spick and span. And so he recommended as many as 5 enemas a day to his customers, who included, now I don't know whether the following names actually went in for the whole process, so to speak, but Johnny Weissmuller, Charles Welch, the inventor of, or the grape juice magnate, Henry Ford, a great number of movers and shakers around the turn of the century all flocked to the Battle Creek Sanitarium.
I've now found my note on what on the box led me to need to demand myself to talk about Kellogg on the box today.
Okay.
I read a recipe that I can go online and get, and it wasn't the one on the box, cheddar, broccoli, corn bake.
Now, that could have been on the menu at the sanitarium in 1900. I wonder if it was.
I don't know.
Except
I was shocked. I had just read about the Kellogg's, and I look at this thing, and cheddar, broccoli, corn bake.
Well, in my childhood cereal-eating days, I feel sure they didn't have cheddar, broccoli, corn bake on the back of the box.
You're damn right they didn't. Just this morning they put it on. No, I hadn't looked at the back until this morning.
Yes.
How appropriate.
Yeah.
The battle between these two fellows, the Kellogg's, John and William, and Will, actually, is so incredible. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It goes into court. There's a decision. It comes out of court, and they start all over again.
It's the sibling rivalry that would not die. John Harvey Kellogg, actually, that may be true of all sibling rivalries, but in any case.
This one for sure.
For sure. John Harvey Kellogg was 8 years older than Will, and he treated him fairly meanly through much of his childhood. He used to put on those cold nights up in Michigan, he used to warm his feet on his brother's back, on Will's back. And Will never really forgave him. But Will did go to work for John Harvey at the sanitarium at the age of 19 and spent 20 to 25 of his best years working about 16 to 18 hours a day for his brother.
For how much money?
Peanuts. It was less than he was earning when he was sweeping out his father's broom factory when he was 10 years old.
Right. That's really...
So he was treated very poorly by his older brother. And small wonder that when Will Kellogg broke away over the invention of the cornflake, they spent the next 20 years suing each other and speaking to each other almost entirely in court.
Amazing. Amazing. Now, Will, in my judgment, triumphs. Will is, successful in the modality required by the age he's living in. I mean, the other guy was back in the 19th century.
Well, if you ate granola for breakfast this morning, you might have said John Harvey triumphed because he invented granola.
Oh, my goodness.
But you ate cornflakes, so Will wins out.
There's so many things to learn, and we only have one more segment. We're going to learn more. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Yeah, and the guy that wasn't so sure the book should have been published in the first place. And I discovered in reading it that it's a very, very good book. Its title is Brothers by George Howe Colt on his brothers and brothers in history. It's a very different book. It's very entertaining. It's intriguing, and you'll learn stuff you don't know. So go get it. Incidentally, Publishers Weekly thought it was pretty good also. They say in part, no one writes better than Colt about families and the strange alchemy that binds them, and the way siblings make each other what they are, even as they become distinct, even estranged personalities. And as you point out, even as they become individuals who want to get farther and farther away from siblings and parents and home domicile and all that kind of stuff, they're still together. And one of the places in the book where I think that's gotten into is this one on page 272, which, if you can context it, do that. But I'd like you to read it.
Sure. I should say that early in my life, I spent all my childhood trying to be like my older brother, as it's true in most families. And then when you become an adolescent, you are working often as hard as you can to be as unlike your siblings as possible. And so this portion,
because you're growing up,
I'm finding myself.
Yes, finding.
And so all those four Colt boys were finding themselves, which meant they didn't want to find each other.
Right.
And so this excerpt is from that time. If only we had spent more time together beyond the gravitational forces of home, my brothers and I might have acknowledged one another's fitful evolution. But on the rare occasions we were all in one place, Thanksgiving, Christmas, a few days at the end of summer, we quickly, unwittingly resumed our familiar roles: Harry the loner, Ned the rebel, Mark the baby of the family, me the peacemaker. Even as I worked so hard to become someone new myself, I wouldn't allow my brothers to change. There were good times, playing table hockey, laughing at old jokes, sharing popcorn at a movie. But for the most part we remained in our own spheres. We no longer fought, or even argued much. It might have been better to have had that contact than none at all. But while I lamented the distance between us, I think there should be no relationship closer than that of two brothers, I wrote in my journal. I did nothing to bring us together. When it came time for me to leave, I wrote after one visit, I had the sensation of blowing it, not getting down to the mind-bending conversations I knew we could and should be having. The summer after Harry and I graduated from college, our grandfather died. We met for the funeral on a drizzly July day in the small Rhode Island town where he had grown up. After the service, as my brothers and I shouldered Gramps' coffin through the church, it struck me how united we must have seemed to the people we passed. Outside, we slid the coffin into the hearse and scattered to our separate lives.
I think one of the underlying beauties of that is that it's universal. That's the way we all are. And the coming together for a funeral is a perfect expression of that need to come together and the ambivalence about ever doing it. And then it takes something like your funeral to make it happen.
Yes, and to point out that, at least in that case, that we really weren't together. We seemed together to the outside world. We were four young, brothers who looked a lot alike. And yet at that point in time, we were so busy off doing our own things. We didn't have time for each other. We still wanted to keep each other in the stereotypes that we had devised early on in our lives. But that's a very common phenomenon in families, I think.
I don't know what time in your lives that you were just reading about, but the last chapter of the book, called The Colt Men, is, I know because you tell us, is 2011.
Yes.
And it's a spring evening, and you've gathered for dinner at your house in Western Massachusetts. Harry and Sandy have come down from Maine to stay with us. Ned and his wife Kathy are staying with Mom and Dad at their retirement community 20 minutes south. Mark has driven out from Boston. The meal is farewell dinner of sorts. Ned and Kathy leave this week for Islamabad, where Ned will start a new job with an international relief organization. Harry leaves the next week for India. The hell are you doing in Western Massachusetts?
Somebody has to stay at home, huh?
You're a dullard, you know. I mean, I'm sorry, but I mean, by comparison.
I'm a typical middle child, I think.
Oh, yeah, blame it on birth order. Harry leaves next week for India, the country in which, after getting so sick 38 years ago, he started on the path to becoming a doctor. He'll spend 5 weeks of his sabbatical leading a group of medical students through the Himalayan foothills, offering health care to local villages. It's rare that all four brothers are together. It's rare, very rare. This afternoon, but at least this is a moment where it wasn't a funeral or a horrible,
Yes.
kind of happening, and there you are. This afternoon, as I mowed the lawn, I felt the anticipatory flutter in my stomach I always feel when I know I'll be seeing them. With Ned traveling the world and our parents in their 80s, we never know when or whether the whole family will be together again. And we talked off air, and in a sense, the whole family will never be together again because your father has passed on.
Yes. And so moments like that you just read are become all the more important in memory. And fortunately, we were lucky to have about the last 30 years of really wonderful moments as a family. We got together as often as we could, but given that we have Globetrotters in the family, that wasn't often enough.
Folks, this is a beautiful book. It's titled Brothers. George Howe Colt on his brothers and brothers in history. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.